Georgina, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I'm Georgina Hughes. I'm an agile coach in London. I started out life as a front-end developer before we had the term front-end developer. So I was pioneering like HTML5, CSS3. I did Angular 0, some early React. And then I got really bored of JavaScript and arguing with people about how things should be to be user-centered. So I was like, how can I still do people and stay in tech, and somehow ended up as an agile coach. So that's how I got here.
The agile terminology is thrown about in many, many contexts. Companies like to say they're agile. And my opinion is that based on the Agile Manifesto, which was made quite a long time now, a lot of companies are struggling to be agile. And what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that most agile implementations absolutely suck, and they're not agile, they're not Scrum, they're not Kanban. People are just use these terms and then do what they've always done. They think the change is in the language, not in the practices. And I've got a great example. So probably the very last time I was a developer, I worked with a project manager, and she said to me, I like to do Scrum because I think developers really enjoy Scrum. I was like, oh, brilliant. Yeah, great. We go into the daily stand-up, big meeting room. Project manager sits down, plugs in her computer onto the projector. Then the 15 developers get to stand around her, and she goes through ticket by ticket on Jira, telling us how we're doing and what we need to do next. I was like, oh, okay, we're doing not Scrum. I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I think a lot of people have either misinterpreted the message, or have not been able to really apply the message. Now, why do I say that? The whole agile methodology is to kind of fail fast, go quick, fail fast, test, verify. And I have not seen any company form this because, one, they don't want to fail. That's one of the biggest things. They don't want to push something out and test it that's half-baked. And I'm really trying to get my head around, do you think the Agile Manifesto is incorrect?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it?
Big question. You like that one? This is why I brought you to the podcast show. So
I'm going to lose my agile badge.
yeah.
I think the manifesto is great. I think there's a lot of real good in there, but I think it's values and principles, right? And people want processes and tools. So, I mean, literally the very first value, right? People don't care about the people. They care about the mechanism that the people work within. And I mean, obviously, this comes from where we've been, doing factory production lines, and people haven't been taught young enough or early enough in their career that knowledge work, service industries don't work like that. And you can understand why, right? Because if you go in and buy a coffee, your coffee still works like a production line, yeah? When you literally buy things, they've all been produced, they're tangible, and they've all come from a production line. It's really hard to understand that services and creation and, software development, regardless of what people like to say, is a creative industry. People don't work the same. And we need to go and look how artists work, how painters learn to paint, how printers learn to print, how writers learn to write. They're the industries that have been going for hundreds of years and have already worked this stuff out. And if you look at the Agile Manifesto in more of an artistic, creative context, you can absolutely see it mapped. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the manifesto. I think, if anything, the problem with the manifesto is you can't sell it. You can't sell a bunch of values and principles, right? And I'm not the first person to say this. The productization of the agile space has led to a complete factory setting of how to do agile. And it doesn't work because, again, they've gone and productized, the production lined how to do Agile. And they come into a company and they go, oh, look, here's your Agile maturity checklist. Tick, 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 tick. Now you're Agile. Bing. Give me my money. Bye.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the manifesto. I don't think the manifesto is a problem. I think trying to make money is the problem. But, isn't it always?
Yeah, it is. Definitely. But you make a good point there. I think, we're really trying to adapt a methodology. And that's another thing that I was wanting to speak to you about. There's so many methodologies there. If you really think about the initial manifesto and what has now sprouted out, like say Scrum XP, Kanban, you name it, there's just so many methodologies. What do you think is the value of bringing an Agile methodology into software development from a high level? What's your perception?
So I think it's important to be explicit that the Agile Manifesto came from people who were doing Scrum and XP and other things like that, and they just wanted to kind of document what they were doing. Now, clearly they had other motives, but, they documented this is how it should be done. Let's stop doing these 5-year projects that fail and start just trying to do little bits. And that's where fail fast has come from. It's not that we're looking to failure. It's not that we're trying to fail. It's that failure is inevitable. So let's try and just fail on a short, small bit and learn from that so that we can then do the next thing. And if you're used to writing code, that's what software development feels like. It's failure, 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 failure. Oh, I've successfully developed that thing. I've solved that problem. Let's move on to the next one. Failure, 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 failure.
Yeah.
Your code doesn't compile and then suddenly it does and it's all good. So I think it's worth being really explicit and mentioning that, those things came first. It's not that they came afterwards. It's stuff like SAFe that came afterwards that arguably could be called a bigger problem. But even then, I don't think so, right? Because if you're a big organization, like you're an airline or a supermarket or something, and your primary output has never been software development, and now we're in this world where, let's face it, every company is a software company, right? Everyone is developing software. That is their primary revenue stream these days, or at least it's a large chunk of their value streams. And so they've got to refocus on to being a software house. So if you're one of those companies and you're suddenly trying to work out how to operate in this software space, and you've never done that before, or you've done it a couple of times with like 1, 2, 3, 4-year plan cycles, then SAFe is suddenly quite revolutionary, even with its 3 months, which to those of us who come from small startups, like 10 people companies, that feels like an incredibly long time. But for them, that feels really quick, really short, and they are doing a lot better by using that than they had done previously without using it. So I think these frameworks and methods do have something to offer. They're just not the panacea, because what happens is they are brought in and the manifesto is ignored. There's none of that respecting the customer and working for the customer. There's no respecting the team and ensuring the team has what they need to get the job done. And the team is not given the freedom to improve its processes, move away from those frameworks and really focus on technical excellence in, whatever discipline, that development, UX, testing, whichever field that particular developer is specialized in. So yeah, I do think they have value, but I don't think that the value is being fully realized by the companies. And I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier, that they're still in the wrong mindset. And this is the problem with change, right? When you're going as an organization to have a big change, you're going to treat your change project like you've treated every other project. Yeah. So even that whole implementation is being brought in the wrong way. And there's a lot to unpack there, right? If you go in as an agile coach, there's can be centuries of history in an organization, and to try and change all that and expect it to happen in 6 months, 2 years. It's crazy. It takes longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for us, especially in Design Ops Align, being a consultancy company where, my colleagues are going in, they're given a short amount of time to change processes. And it's, as you mentioned, you have to unravel the history and culture. And that's one of the biggest things that we struggle with, because people don't tell you the in-depth insights. Trying to do that in such a quick time, it's one of the challenging things in our company. But I wanna kind of focus how Agile and UX kind of tie in together. And this is my personal opinion. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. I always thought that Agile never really took UX into consideration. It was purely on developers. What's your thoughts on that? What do you think?
I hear this so often, right?
Yeah.
I even hear, oh, there's no such thing as a tester in Scrum or Agile. There's only developers. Like, no. A developer is anyone who is working towards the development of the product. So that's everybody. And I think part of the problem is that people see the sprint only for the software development, maybe more so these days for the testing. Back when I was first starting out, years ago, even testing, you had a test sprint or an integration sprint, which we knew was wrong back then, but it still happened. And I think, like, recently I was working with an organization and their operating model had UX and a big arrow into the sprint box. And I was like, can you not see how that's a waterfall? I mean, that's literally a waterfall. So I think there is still just a perception problem. But no, I think UX is definitely part of it. And what I really like, have you heard of Google Design Sprints? Have you ever done one of those? Yeah.
I mean, I do design sprints, but I've never done the Google design sprint.
Oh, okay. So there's a book called Sprint, and what they do is, like, day 1, you're thinking about ideas, and then by day 4, you've got a prototype that you're user testing, and it's a really quick iteration on an idea. And obviously it has to be really tiny, because to go from a problem we're trying to solve to a working prototype by the end of the week can't be a big problem. Now, one of my mentors is Tobias Mayer, and he was, yeah. He was there back in the day when they were creating Scrum, and he always says to me, how this works is the whole team works on one problem at a time, not one person or 2 people, none of this pairing. It's the whole team effort. And so that should include, like, someone from UX, someone from front, someone from back, testing, and they should all be there together going, well, this is the problem, and this is my part of the solution, how I feed into that solution. And, I think we keep going around in circles here, which is people have just misunderstood. They've not learned about it, or they've learned on the job, and they've learned from a poor quality implementation of Scrum or Agile and not seen what it should be. Yeah. And, let's face it, I'm a geek. I love deep diving into things. I'm neurodivergent, so this is very much how my brain works. Anyway, I work with depth, not with breadth. But most people work with breadth, not depth. So, if someone's told them something, they're not then going to go on the internet and check it's true and read 10 different people's opinions and 6 different books on the topic before they come to their own opinion. So it's not, I don't want to call it a failing of any one person or an individual. It's just how humans work, that we're not very good at exploring complicated topics. And Agile really is a philosophical topic. It's not tangible in the same way. So people don't go off and learn about it. And I think that's why we don't see UX more involved within the Scrum development process, because it's not really thought of as the place for UX. That's something that gets done still big bang upfront design, which is what we're trying to move away from.
Yeah, I mean, it's we call that the big reveal, and it's a very bad practice. You do a big reveal, and the developers are just like, we can't get that to production. That is and that's one thing we all try and rectify when we come in as a consultancy, is not to do that. You bring in developers as much as possible. But how we've adapted it, and I'm going to do some product placement, just as,
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm going to just put some product placement in there. But no, generally, I think what we tend to do is that we kind of work in a agile waterfall way. We take the methodologies and we kind of planning, which is, I think agile sprint planning, I think that is bang on. They got that right. They really got that right. How to break epics down and break them into stories and break them, and then know the level of effort. And that works so perfectly with UX. I think it's in harmony to really show our product managers what we do and the level of effort. And I think absolutely it's one of our main ethos in Design Ops Align. But what I have struggled to see UX teams really benefit is really bringing in developers early on in an ideation stage, because of resource. They're just so busy.
We're too busy to get faster.
We're too busy to make improvements. And I've also found, and again, this is just my opinion from my experience, designers tend not to bring developers into an ideation. Now, there's many things about that. I think one of the key things is that designers don't like to be told no up front. They try to push the boundaries. But what would you say to people who do follow that kind of process? And, to ourselves, what would you say can be improved, knowing that resources are not available for quick development, quick pushing? And also, on top of that question, I wanted to ask you, most product managers do not operate with an MVP principle. Yeah, no, this is common.
True. It's true.
They tend to go down an MDP, the most desirable product, to go to production. So what advice would you give to people who are in this situation? Because there's millions of us.
So I actually think the product person question is easier to answer. So I'm going to start with that. You need better coaching for the product person. And I think what quite often happens is the Scrum Master thinks they're there for the developers and forgets about the product owner. So my poor Scrum Master brother and sisters, you need to coach that product owner too, And I think there's this kind of informal, unconscious hierarchy in most people's minds, which is the developers are here and then the Scrum Master and PO, their peers above the developers, there to put into the developers, where really everyone's a peer. The Scrum Master, the PO, the developers, you're all peers. You're not a hierarchy. That's the whole point. And so that Scrum Master needs to coach. And if that Scrum Master's unable to, for any reason, finding your organizational agile coach, which again, I know these days is getting a rarer and rarer thing, and getting them to come in and help. But it sounds like that product person, owner or manager, I don't care what you want to call it, they are not adhering to the principles, right? And they just need someone to help them anchor back. And as a Scrum Master, it's a much easier role to do than as an Agile coach, because you're there working with them all the time. You just go, look. And I think Scrum Masters should know the manifesto, not like word perfect, but they should know each of the principles in like a 2 or 3 word version, so they can then go, well done, you've just adhered to this principle. Or, you know what, we're deviating from that principle. How can we realign? What are your suggestions to move us back to being in alignment with that principle? And that's really good quality coaching, where you're balancing that directive of we're trying to achieve alignment with the manifesto, and non-directive, which is how do you want us to get there? So that would be my advice on the product bit. The user stories is the big problem, right? Because user stories are not high quality. Most of the time they're as a user, and there's no understanding of what this persona is. And this is where UX can really help the developers, because I think what you've said is that we're really good as a team of getting that first diamond in the double diamond model, right? We can really nail that, and sprint planning helps us to nail that, and it's brilliant. But it's then when you're sparking out into that second diamond, we're expecting developers to pick up a story and go, right, I'm just going to have one solution and I'm just going to work on that one solution and it'll be done in a few days. Rather than, no. We've had lots of ideas about the problem and we've come to one idea about the problem. Now let's have lots of ideas about the solution and then come to one idea on the solution. And that's what we're missing. I don't know how we solve it as a broader social problem. Coaching can help. The Scrum Master should definitely be encouraging it. Managers need to understand more that we want to have variations here to come up with different ideas. I think Elon Musk, back before we all knew he was a bit crazy, when he set up SpaceX, he set up 2 organizations to compete with each other, and whoever first got to the solution, that group of people would stay and the other people were going to lose their job. So maybe we can be a little bit inspired from that, but not completely, and go, well, we're going to give these problems, these user stories, to 2 teams, and you both come up with the solution, and then we can go and do some A/B testing in the real world and see which one works and come back to it. But we've got to decouple this whole, the team and the problem and being a one-to-one relationship, because it's not. It's either the problem is solved by the team, but they don't have a one-to-one relationship with the solutions, or we have multiple teams trying to solve the same problem. But again, we come back to the money problem, right? Which people think that this costs more. But in the long run, it's going to be a higher revenue for you because you're going to find the better solution. And again, if you keep it small, then you're not really making a high investment for finding the best solution.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
That's a good point. I mean, I'm gonna make a comment about the user story. I've always taught teams, don't ever write a story, especially UX. I've always taught them, and probably it's a bad practice, but in my opinion, I've always found that it gets the best value. I've always taught them to write a story don't write a story as a UX designer, because most of UX work is task orientated. The epic level, yes. Then you write it as a user, XYZ because of XYZ. But on a story level, they're really more task-orientated checklists or things that you have to do. I know I use the word checklist, but, people won't understand, they see the essence that, stories within the epics are literally things that we have to do within that project module, and that's how I've always taught teams to really see the benefit of breaking stories down or breaking epics down, or just breaking the features down in general.
Yeah.
I want to take another stab at why companies tend not to follow Agile. Now, large companies kind of follow a PI release, which is probably 4 releases over a year. You always have in the PI quarter releases, and sometimes you might have hot fixes or anything in between those releases. And this is where I'm struggling also, because people will also say that's not Agile, because you are pushing something after, developing a bit and, designing it, but you just push it out at the end. So it does follow that waterfall methodology. So how do companies get past this when their development stack is not at a mature level where it is a CI/CD where they can pump out or release anytime they want, or they don't have micro front end architecture when they can just literally update this component without having to wait for a release cycle. How do companies get past that if they only follow a PI release?
They don't.
Oh, okay. You just
So-
basically, you basically just answered that in one quick go. So
Expand.
go for it.
So look, agility is for small things, right? You tell me what agile animals are in the wild, right? We're looking cheetah, maybe a salmon. Do we think agility is a property of an elephant or a cow? You know, it doesn't map like that, because whether it's complicated or complex, the amount of unknowns, so known unknowns or unknown unknowns, grows. And as there's more you don't know, it slows you down because you're having to work this out. And if you really wanted to harness it as a large organization, then you'd stop thinking like a large organization. And, you know, that's kind of a paradoxical moment.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look, I don't remember the full details, but there was like this FBI project after 9/11, and they spent years and years and years and wasted tens of millions of dollars and came out with nothing. It was a software project, you know, and they came out with nothing. And then they gave it over to someone else who did it with 12 people, and they were like, we're going to be really small. They managed to deliver all of the requirements under time. And in the remaining time, they brought in all the changes. So all the improvements, all the things that no one had thought about. And they did it in about half the money, the project that never delivered it in. So just because you're producing a large piece of software doesn't mean you need a large amount of people, right? You can produce and again, this is because it's art, not because it's a production line. You can produce something huge with like under 10 people. My first job out of uni was working on the WEEE reporting system for the EA. So this was a product that everybody in the country, the entire country, who produced waste, so that's pretty much everybody, would log on and report through the EA to the EU about where their waste went, what percentage was recyclable, what wasn't recyclable, and it would then calculate their fee. And there were four people building this product because they just did it a little bit at a time. I remember my boss saying, because this would have been back within like 5 years of the manifesto being written, so it was just starting to be heard of here in the UK. And he went into the office, he came round and he was like, I don't know what all the fuss is about. This is how we've always worked.
Yeah.
You know, so if a big company genuinely wants to achieve that agility, then they just need to start thinking small. But they can't.
Yeah.
So they don't, you know. And it's that whole believe you can or believe you can't, whichever you believe will be the truth.
Let me take two stabs at that and let me play devil's advocate. I think the reason why they can't think small is because, as mentioned, a lot of companies do follow that BRM, big room meeting philosophy, or the PI release philosophy. So they try and cram as much into that release and bang, so they're trying to get bang for their buck, really. But then
they've got like 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people.
Yeah.
Where's the bang for buck? Because they're still got more people trying to produce more in the same amount of time. Why not produce less with a smaller amount of people?
Yeah, true. Very, very true. But then you basically answered my question that a company that does follow a PI release schedule cannot be agile. So they do. So the recipe that you've just mentioned to me is that in order to be an agile, you need to have a continuous pipeline. That's one. Yeah.
Yep.
2, you need to have small teams that can build incremental value. 2, and 3, that that somebody is managing those teams' requirements from a product down to development down to design, and that really is the combination of
not requirements, not managing requirements. I think this is still like thinking in production line rather than thinking in art. What you're trying to think about is the problems. What are the problems we're trying to solve? And then just throw those problems at the teams. You don't need to break it down into tasks. You don't need to break down these problems so they're tiny. You, as a product person, just need to take the problems, and then the developers, because they're the people in the know with the expertise, with the understanding of the system to a depth that even the best product manager really can't know. Because if you're not doing the nuts and bolts of it, then you're not going to know each of those nuts and bolts, no matter how much you're paying attention. And that is no shame on any product person. It's just a fact of life. So just hand over the problems. Say, this is the direction we want to go. Hold that vision, hold it strongly, but hold the problems gently and allow the teams to do what they do best, which is create the solutions.
You see, I have seen a lot of shift in the last, I would say, 5 years. You know, back in my day, I'll do a cough on that one. Well, back in my day, we used to have BAs.
Yeah.
You know, and that role has completely gone.
Yeah. More shame. I think BAs are brilliant. Yeah.
BAs were the absolute brilliant because they were the language, I would say. They were the ones that were getting the requirements. I'm going to use that word. All the problems, they were getting the problems. Let me put it like that, because they were the ones that were gathering the problems and really getting that language down to ourselves, designers, developers, and we would just go on our tangent and figure it out. But since the diminish of BA, the product manager has kind of exploded. And what we're finding a lot in the design field, and also pretty much in the development field, is that these product managers are trying to pretty much do a lot of the design work, the development work, or tell developers this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to do, and it has disrupted that agile methodology. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something I've seen firsthand, but I've heard about it. So I don't really have a broad context here to base my statement in, but I do have opinions. So
Go for it.
So I think if you're doing product well, then if there is one product, there should be one product owner, regardless of the number of teams. I think about 4 or 5 teams of under 10 is probably as much as you should have on a product, because everybody, you've got like 50, maybe 60 people, then everybody can still have lunch together and not like completely overflow a restaurant. You know, you can still kind of have those social moments. Everyone can know each other. When you bump into each other in the kitchen, you still know what you're doing. But at that point, your product owner is going to be flat out if they're trying to communicate with all of those developers. And I think that's where the BA role was fantastic, where they were the product owners committee. So they understood the vision, they held it to. They didn't have absolute final say on anything, but they knew enough and understood the product owner's opinion enough that they could interface with all the teams and the developers and be a conduit. That didn't mean the teams couldn't go to the product owner. It just meant the teams had a dedicated point of contact for them. So I think BAs are great, and they can translate developers into product talk and vice versa. So there was greatness there, and if they are all turning into product managers, I guess they're all going one per team, right? I mean, I've seen that a lot where it's a product owner or product manager per team, and they're not really owning the whole product. They don't really have a vision. They've probably got like a feature set or some kind of column. It's created some kind of vertical in the application. And I think that is a problem, and it's worth remembering. Oh, there's a title for this rule and I can't remember it, but your system, how you architect your software, is directly reflects how your management structure is. So stop trying to design the architecture of your system and start designing the management structure, because they will just naturally correlate.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a really poorly designed system, have lots of product managers, because that's going to make the code crazy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they're doing everything, I mean, it's just ridiculous. The amount of skill set you're asking them to achieve, they're not going to do anything well, right? Specialism rocks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, it's that jack of all trades, master of none kind of aspect, which has always been used on UX people back in the day when you were a generalist. And, I see this happening time and time again where, as you just mentioned, the product is split into vertical columns of multiple product managers. And I think from a UX perspective, you find that when you do that, there's so many inconsistencies in design patterns because that product team is just that, and this one is that. And I have seen companies, so I will give 2 cents on that. I have seen companies rectify that by having a horizontal team. So you still have that vertical teams because they're kind of like the subject matter experts in that, but then you also always have a horizontal team to make sure code cadence is correct. Code practices are kind of adhered to. And from a UX perspective, that design patterns are kind of adhered to across. And obviously that's where guilds come into it. That was the whole
absolutely.
point. That's kind of the aspect of how guilds came about. But I think my 2 cents on this, as we kind of come up to this last bit of the show, is how would you perceive in the next 5 years, Agile still being a main topic that people talk about within business? Do you think it's going to kind of evolve and adapt, or is it still going to kind of stay in its way? Because before you answer that question, the manifesto has not changed, and Agile was always about learning and changing and adapting. And
I hear this a lot.
So you can see...
The last principle out of 12 principles is that the team should inspect their own work and improve their processes. But a set of values and principles is not processes to be updated. However, there is like a timeline, and I'm sure in Agile Scrum trainings that you've attended, you'll have seen, oh, look, we started back in the 60s or the 40s with this, and then we had this, and RAD will be in there, and XP and Scrum will come along, and DAD, and then there'll be the Agile Manifesto, and then SAFe. It's just going to be one of those like dots on the timeline of project management methodologies. Something's going to come. I think we're probably pretty close to someone coming up with the next thing. I actually suspect SAFe was that. And we've already kind of moved beyond the timeline past Agile for SAFe being the thing, and that there will be something else. I'm surprised that nothing big has come along by now. I've talked with a lot of my coaches, in my network. What is the next thing? What are we doing? How are we going to move on? Especially given how the market is. I mean, it is terrible out there. Trying to get a job as a Scrum Master or an Agile coach at the moment, near impossible. So there's got to be something come along, even if it's because people are trying to find a new way of selling their services to the organisations that aren't buying anymore. I don't think it's going to disappear. I do think it's going to be spoken about less, but I think it's going to be a building block into the next thing.
And let me just backtrack on what you just mentioned about the Agile coaches. As you mentioned, Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, those jobs are kind of going as well obsolete as the BA did. And I'll give you my 2 cents about Agile coaches, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong with this one as well. I've worked with great Agile coaches, and I'm talking really great, who taught me a lot, a hell of a lot. In fact, actually, that's why I started Design Ops Aligned, and actually why I went into Design Ops in the first place. It was the building block for me to know, wow, there is an accurate process on how to do design and get the value and show the value. And if it wasn't for that Agile coach, I don't think this company would even be here right now. But then there has been Agile coaches I have worked with, and you'll probably know what I'm going to say in a second. who didn't know how to adapt. They were so strict on this manifesto that they did not know how to really work any other way other than the manifesto. And what's your thoughts about that, about those agile coaches who really didn't? Yeah.
I think that coaching is an incredibly personal thing. So first of all, we're not all going to vibe with the coaches. Like, I've coached people and it's like, there's nothing happening here. We either think so similarly that I can't help you because I can't show you a different perspective, or our personal values are so misaligned that we're just talking like this. And actually, I've walked away from coaching relationships where I knew the person beforehand, and afterwards I'm like, I'm never talking to that person again. So coaching is an incredibly personal thing. So yes, there is definitely something there, but there is also a lot of bad coaches in the world, you know? Just like it used to be that project management was the place that you went to hide if you were kind of not very good at your role, but, you know, okay enough that if other people around you could support you, you got away with it. I'm sure we've all seen those project managers, right?
Yeah, we've seen those.
I think Scrum Mastery and Agile coaching became the place to hide. And I think back in like 2016-ish, some big recruiter in the UK said that Scrum Master was going to be the job title of the year.
Yeah,
so that
I
didn't
remember
help,
that.
you know. People were like flooding in. I've heard like life coaches have come into Agile coaching and all sorts of things. As I said earlier, I think Agile coaching is very directive, because the Agile bit, we know what we're trying to achieve, and then we go to the indirect, non-directive coaching because we're letting you decide how to achieve it. And a coach that has learned how to coach properly, so like I've done Barefoot Coaching, which is a big coaching training organisation here in the UK, they're ICF accredited. I've learned how to coach outside of the Agile sphere, and I think that's incredibly important. I certainly noticed it upped my game from day one. So I think looking to see what the pedigree of your coach is before you hire them is quite important. And a bad coach, regardless of where they've come from, they can be worse than just a waste of money. They can actively harm your organisation, your individuals, because they are there to do the psychological side. I mean, we're not counsellors, we're not therapists. We've got to be very strict about that as coaches. But we are still working with the brains, not with the processes. So it's important to acknowledge that when you're trying to support someone, you need to be careful about that, because you can hurt. And I think we've seen this in managers. People will understand it better if I put it in the framing of managers. That bad manager that you had who made you go home and hate your life did a lot more harm than that manager that left you alone, or even better, actively supported you, right? And the same is with coaches. It can be that range of impact on the individuals. And if we think of systems as like mega brains, then the same can be true on what you're doing to the system. A coach can actively harm the system as much as it can actively help it.
Wow. That's some really cool, that's some really deep words. I've never really thought about it like that. And you make such a valid point. Bad coaches really do more harm than good, and not just on the money, but on your workforce. And that's a brilliant comment to bring up. I'm really glad you brought that one up. Georgina, obviously this is a design podcast. You know, I love for people to learn more about Agile. And what would you say to people that are listening to this podcast, that are looking to get into Agile, especially in design? What advice would you give to them to really adhere to the Agile way of working?
Find some way to really understand the values and principles. Because I know everyone's like to say Agile way of working or Agile methodology, but but it isn't, right? Agile is a philosophy. It's not how to do something, it's why to do something. So get to a point where, I'm not talking about word perfect memorization, though. Back in the day when there were lots of meetups in London, there would be a few of us who would challenge each other to do it word perfectly, because that's what you do when you're in that kind of group, right? But to be able to translate all the principles, all the values into 2 or 3 words so that you can remember them, so that when you come to make a decision about something, so when you think, oh, how am I going to do this? Or, oh, I'm doing this bit of work, that you can then go, oh, you know what, there's a principle about this. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was working in SharePoint, and I had a bunch of files that I knew I was going to have to update. And then I needed also for them to be in a separate place, which I could then share with the wider population to come and take the latest version whenever they needed. I was like, so every time I'm saving this file over here, I'm going to need to copy it here so people have got the latest version. Well, there's a principle for this. Simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential for agility. So I then spent the next half hour learning how to do some power automations. And now what happens is every time one of those files gets saved, it gets automatically copied over in the background to the self-serve repository that I've created. And now I don't need to think about that in the future, other than maybe I'm going to create a new file and I'll need to update that automation. So you really got to find a way of embodying those values and principles. It doesn't matter what your discipline is, what thing you're doing. Is there something that the manifesto wants to pull you in a particular direction? And just that, forget everything else, just the manifesto. That's what makes you agile.
Nice. Brilliant. There's many more questions I would love to ask you. And I think, I like I said, I think there's so many things that I can improve in our way of working with companies, especially with Agile, and especially with designers. And I think there will be a lot more for me to learn. And there's always a lot more for me to learn in the Agile methodology. But I can't thank you enough for coming on our show today. It's been
thank you for having
delightful.
me. It's been brilliant.
Yeah. Even though all our technical issues at the beginning,
we had fun at the start, but it all worked out.
Yeah, it all came down to this really good podcast, and we'd love to have you back on the show again.
Oh, anytime. Love to come back.
Excellent. Thank you, Georgina.
Thank you.